The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode 98.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing one of those movies, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Folks, if you can, please share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow this community of Trek fans who are interested in talking about both the new series and the old series and everything in between. And that will, your sharing of the podcast helps us reach more listeners, and we greatly appreciate that. And this time we're talking about one of the most popular Star Trek films of all time. Later on, we'll be talking about one of the least popular, but this one, let's just live in the happy moment of today. This is November 1986. That's when it came out. And
the 20th anniversary of the original series. So this
exactly.
is the 20th anniversary film for Star Trek.
That's right. And before the J.J. Abrams reboot in 2009, was it? Off the top of my head. Yep. This was the most successful Star Trek film made. So the J.J. Abrams one was when you even out the dollars.
Which is kind of surprising, because I think if you ask fans, most people would say their favorite is Wrath of Khan, but Wrath of Khan wasn't as successful in the box office as this was.
I think almost everyone would agree, of the original series films, it was one of the even-numbered ones, 2, 4, or 6. It's just a question of which one do you personally like the best. For me, it's 6. I like
Undiscovered
Back
Country.
to the Future.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great, though. No,
better than the others. But I love this one, and I love Wrath of Khan.
Well, I think the reason this one was most successful is not so much because it appealed to the fans, but because it had appealed beyond the fans. It had a broad popular. In fact, when they marketed it in other countries, they downplayed the Star Trek aspect of it, which was a very interesting marketing. I saw the Australian poster for it, it had Spock and Kirk, but it doesn't say Star Trek on it. It's very funny.
Yeah. So since we're kind of talking meta-level success and so forth with these films, here are a few things to point out. Subsequent to Wrath of Khan, they keep trying to remake Wrath of Khan.
Yes.
It's like we need a big villain to serve as the nemesis of the captain, and they need to be equally matched, and we need to have a climactic space battle between them and stuff like that. And in the J.J. Abrams era, they didn't then literally remade Khan.
Literally.
And you don't need those things to have a great Star Trek film. Look at this one, the most successful one of all times until after the long drought.
Right.
No one, now you can infer people did off screen, but no one dies in this movie. There are no weapons fired in anger except for one failed attempt to stun somebody.
Yep.
Right.
There is no villain. This is not set on the Enterprise, and there is no space battle.
Right.
So it breaks all of the rules, and it's awesome. You do not need to try to keep remaking Wrath of Khan.
Exactly.
You tell a good story and people will go watch it?
Right. Entertain
Shocker.
people. So one of the important things about the success of The Voyage Home is we have this movie to thank for what came later, because it was this success that made Paramount greenlight The Next Generation, which comes out later. Right. I mean, it was in development, there was talk, but the success of this was the definitive yes. Okay, Star Trek is still alive. We can do a TV series in Star Trek, and this is where we're going to go with it. So this movie, thank you for essentially saves Star Trek for us at this point. One other, a couple other behind the scenes bits. Michael Okuda. If you're not a real deep Trek fan, you might not know the name, but he is the guy who's really known for the look and feel of Next Gen and later.
Gen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did all of the on-screen effects, like the displays, and he's responsible for a lot of how Star Trek, modern Star Trek looks.
He wasn't a special effects artist. He was a design artist. And
Yes.
so he designed the ship interiors.
He's essentially the Johnny Ive of Star Trek. In that, if you think of that, he's that inspiration. This was his first Star Trek. This is his first work on Star Trek, and then he would later go on to work for Next Gen. Another point: the character of Gillian Taylor, Dr. Gillian Taylor, was originally supposed to be a guy,
and it was supposed to be Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy, who is a huge Star Trek fan.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, he was going to be an absent-minded professor, and he was going to where we've seen that before, and it was going to be a whole thing with that. But they wrote the script with him in mind, and then he passed on it to do Golden Child, which, if you remember Golden Child, this was a mistake.
Yeah, and he has subsequently acknowledged it was he was a mistake to take that part over this.
Big mistake. So that was a lot of fun. So, and then another point, the whales that they used were 4-foot animatronics that were so realistic they fooled whale scientists who are watching the movie. They got complaints that people were swimming, that they filmed too close to real whales in reality, and that they were interfering with them. And they had to point out, no, this is all special effects.
Some of them were 4-foot models, others were not.
And I think there was a lot of stock footage in here, like the weather effects and stuff like that. A lot of that was stock footage that they reused.
Right. The scene where the whales were swimming toward the Golden Gate Bridge at the end of the film was filmed on location and almost ended in disaster when a cable got snagged by a nuclear submarine and they got towed out to sea. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit.
Oops.
Also, the scene where they've crashed in the water. And it's meant to be at the Golden Gate Bridge, but whenever we see the crew on the ship in the rain, that's in the Paramount parking lot. And they dug up the set that had been used for the parting of the Red Sea sequence in the Ten Commandments, and that's where they filmed that scene.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
I knew it was a tank scene with a green screen behind. I mean, that was pretty clear, but I didn't realize it was the same one as the Red Sea. Red Sea. That's awesome.
Yep. The aircraft carrier is not the Enterprise, which was not in port at the time. The actual USS Enterprise, it was the USS Ranger, which was conventionally powered. But
yeah, I like the point on the Memory Alpha. It's like, the Navy would not have let them on the Enterprise to get to anywhere near the nuclear reactors.
Right, they would not be in the nuclear spaces. Directed by Leonard Nimoy, his second outing as director in Star Trek. First time was Search for Spock, but this is the first time when he plays a major role, when he's on screen a lot. So. Made a little more difficult for him, but 2 outings, 2 big successes. So this has really cemented his directing career. And I do want to note, on a personal note, the soundtrack for Voyage Home was my entry into modern jazz.
Okay.
The music of this, I was 17 years old at the time, and I liked movie soundtracks, and I got this one, and I was taken by the music of. Oh, what's the name? The starts with an R. That jazz tune when they're first walking through San Francisco.
Oh, the Waka Jawaka sound?
Yes.
It's really 1970s police show movie or TV show.
Yes.
Thing.
What is that? Oh, I didn't write it down because I knew off the top of my head what the name of the jazz group was. But yes, there was that was my entry, and I became a big jazz fan because of that. So
I never thought of that as jazz. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I immediately thought, Streets of San Francisco, Beretta, Kojak, all those cop shows with the Waka Jawaka guitar.
Yes, that's kind of a jazz sound that they used in those TV shows.
By the way, one more behind the scenes thing. This is the only Star Trek movie to have product placement.
Yes.
You see Valvoline on the side of the garbage truck. You've got Michelob beer they're drinking, and then they're in front of the big Pacific Bell Yellow Pages.
Oh, you missed the biggest one of all, Father Corey. Macintosh.
And Macintosh. Apple.
With Scotty in front of the
computer.
Yeah, it's part of the computer. That was the big
classic
one.
Mac Plus.
Yeah. The Yellow Jackets. by the way.
Is that?
That's the jazz band, the Yellow Jackets. Sorry, just totally. But
And,
yes, product placement.
And any of us who are computer geeks, especially classic computer geeks, would love to have that Mac Plus today. But
We'll talk. Yeah, definitely want to talk more about that scene when we get to it, because that's a big thing.
I remember using one of those back in the day, and I was the editor of a pro-life newsletter, and I composed it on that, and I got so many little bomb icons. It was incredible.
Again, we'll get to that. We'll get to that because I want to talk about it. So let's talk about from the beginning of the movie. The movie picks up from the end of Search for Spock. This is a 3-movie arc, essentially. Wrath of Khan flows right into Search for Spock, which flows right into Voyage Home. It's sort of it's a trilogy.
Yep.
Actually, let's start before the beginning, because we have the opening credits, and we've got a dedication to the crew of the Challenger.
Yes.
Which had with the first shuttle to blow up. I remember when it blew up when I was in college. I remember coming into the student union, and they had a big TV screen, and there was that iconic image of the forking, vapor trails where it had blown up.
Yep.
And it's a really nice dedication where they say that they, are sure that the legacy of the Challenger crew will live on into the 23rd century.
Yep.
And then we get the opening credits, and in my notes I have nice music.
Mm-hmm.
This is a different Star Trek theme than ones we've had before, and it sounds really nice. It is upbeat, it is energetic, it is triumphant. I would like to hear them reuse this. They took the Jerry Goldsmith theme from the motion picture and used it for Next Gen, but I would like to hear this again in some form.
This is Leonard Rosenman did this one. Yeah.
One thing I
want to point out before that is an international release, because Search for Spock did not do well internationally. They needed to add some stuff in before the beginning of the movie in order to get people up to speed on what's going on. So they actually added a few scenes from Search for Spock here. So Sarek and Kirk in his apartment, and then the couple of the events of them stealing the Enterprise, and then all the stuff on Genesis. So there was there's several scenes, and then they came to the dedication and opening credits. So it was very interesting that they did that.
So kind of like they did before Search for Spock, where they had kind of a reminder of what happened in Wrath of Khan.
Yes, the black and white that turned into the color. Yes, yes, that's true.
Then in the credits, we see that Brock Peters is going to be playing Admiral Cartwright, and he'll be familiar from Deep Space Nine fans because he was Benjamin Sisko's father in that. We've got Robin Curtis back as Savik, because Kirstie Alley only played her for the first movie she was in, which was the Khan movie.
Yeah.
Also, we've got John Schuck as a Klingon ambassador. And John Schuck appears in a lot of make-up sci-fi roles, but people will remember him who are Babylon 5 fans as the second Drawl, the guy in The Great Machine on Epsilon 3. He's the second youthful, very energetic and theatrical Drawl.
That's right.
John Schuck is one of those character actors who's done everything. Yeah.
Talk about actors, of course, Mark Leonard is back in as Sarek, but also you have Jane Wyatt come back as Amanda.
Very nice.
Yeah, her first comeback.
Yeah, it was very nice to see her as well.
And it's her final film role.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, very good. And just to kind of place in time, Search for Spock came out 2 years previously, so this movie came out, it was 2 years later when released. So we have a giant probe approaching Earth again.
Yep.
Shades of motion picture.
This probe is much better than the last one.
Yes, it's not a big CGI cloud.
And we don't spend 2 hours watching it on a screen with nothing happening.
Yes. And then we have the USS Saratoga encountering the probe, which is the same name as the ship that Sisko is on at the beginning of Deep Space Nine, but I think it's a different ship. They just reused
this was the same model as the Reliant in Search for Spock.
Yes, they reused the model.
So the probe is on its way to Earth. They meet it at the neutral zone, but the probe is on its way to Earth because it's searching for whales, which is the whole theme of this movie. It's Star Trek IV, The Search for Whales.
Right.
So much so that that's how I think of it. I couldn't even initially remember the actual title. I just think of it as The Search for Whales. And I want to know more about this whale probe. I know it's been covered in expanded media novels, but I'd like to see them explore this more on screen. Because this is a fascinating corner of the Star Trek universe. Apparently, humpback whales are intelligent. They've had contact with extraterrestrials who are very whale-like in some respects.
Yep.
Mhm.
Let's learn more about that.
Yep. It's
Absolutely.
interesting that they don't get into it. They kind of start in media res, like in the middle, without explanation, and we don't get an explanation. I kind of like that they do that in this movie, that we don't spend a lot of time telling us why.
Here, yes.
Yeah.
Here, it's totally justified the way they do it, but it's so intriguing. I want to know more. It's like follow up on this on a TV show.
Right.
Yes, I can see that. The Federation, then we're at the Federation Council. They're replaying events from Search for Spock, and the Klingon ambassador, played by Peter Schuck.
John Schuck.
The Klingon ambassador characterizes the events of the last two movies as Federation aggression perpetrated by a cabal led by Kirk against the Klingons. What I find interesting is in both the last movie and this movie, David Marcus is the one who invented Genesis. There's no mention of Carol Marcus at all in this, and I'm kind of curious why they made that decision, not even to mention her off screen.
Presumably to keep the audience from being confused.
Right.
I mean, Kirk has just had his son die.
Yeah.
They need to mention that.
Yeah.
Well,
and he was the one that made Genesis unstable.
Right.
Because he used protomatter. So he's the one to blame for the Genesis planet falling apart, which then justifies, although they don't go into it, it justifies the Klingon view of it as a weapon. So John Schuck refers to it as the Genesis torpedo.
Yes.
That then cloaks its destructive nature by temporarily creating new life. And so he wants Kirk extradited for trial in the Klingon Empire, which we will eventually see pay off in episode 6.
Yes.
Yep.
Also, I find it interesting the council is, as they're watching footage from Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, we're seeing things like the exterior of the Enterprise blowing up. And you're thinking, was there a satellite system in orbit around the Genesis planet that could capture that footage?
Oh, come on. Ephraim and Dot showed us that the Dot robot got ejected out into space.
Well, this is my point, is I think I assume that actually, even though they don't talk about them, there's a vast cloud of drones and probes around everything we see on Star Trek. Yeah,
that's where all the footage
part of their
from.
tech. We're living in this cloud of objects recording everything.
So Sarek intervenes on behalf of Kirk, to which the Klingon ambassador says Vulcans are well known as the intellectual puppets of the Federation, which is I thought was a funny line.
What a burn! Yeah.
The Federation president then says that don't worry, we're going to put Kirk on trial. He's charged with violating regulations. At which the ambassador...
Nine regulations.
Sputters, regulations! He's just outraged at this idea, which I thought was... And then he says, there shall be no peace as long as Kirk lives, which is... They have referred to, and in fact, they've obliquely referred to the idea of a treaty for the first time, peace negotiations between the Federation and the Klingons.
Which will also pay off in episode 6.
That's right. Then we cut to Vulcan, where Kirk is doing his captain's log of the new ship, which the Klingon bird of prey, which McCoy has named the HMS Bounty, which I thought was a nice touch by McCoy.
Because why? I mean, we should explain it for listeners who may not know.
Right, the famous Mutiny on the Bounty, which was a story about mutineers who had a captain that they overthrew, Captain Bligh, who was a tyrant that they overthrew and mutinied against, and eventually created a colony in the South Pacific, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the HMS Bounty, the Bounty has become sort of entered popular culture as the idea of mutineers, and so that's the ship. Kirk has agreed to return to Earth to face the music, and which I thought was interesting because Vulcan's a Federation member, right? Can't they just be arrested there?
Yep.
Why aren't they just extraditing him back to Earth?
Right.
And the rest of the crew also votes to go back too. So apparently they had the option of staying on Vulcan and maybe fighting the extradition. It's possible that because this is so we know Spock's family is really high up in the Vulcan elite. His dad is an ambassador.
T'Pau.
They at his marriage, T'Pau who officiated, and she's like so famous. Even Kirk knew about her and was agog that Spock's family was
all
having
of Vulcan wrapped up in a package.
officiate.
Yeah,
yeah, and then they just saved the ambassador's son using this mythico-historical rite that had not been used in recorded history, and it worked. You know, you could see the Vulcans saying, we're giving these people diplomatic immunity.
Right. And they're being allowed to fly themselves home in the Bird of Prey, which I think might be just a recognition of, like, look, it's Kirk. It's the Enterprise crew. Yes, they committed a crime, but, you know, they
give
did
them the
it in
last
service.
honor at least. Give them the last honor to at least turn themselves in versus going and arresting them.
And they did it in service of a greater good, I think, is a recognition of, you know, it's a technical violation of the law, but it wasn't self-serving in that sense. And they're taking the Bird of Prey, which is an intelligence goldmine, of course. It's a enemy warship. We have the scene of Spock's testing,
which is great.
Yes, I like the questions.
I love several things about this. The first one is the computer asks him the principal events on Earth in the year 1987, and he types his response. And we get this close-up of his hand, so we can't see what he says.
Yes.
But if you freeze frame and look at what's on the screens in response to the questions, it's computers cloned from carrots and New York Times last magazine to close doors. And neither of those fits 1987, but 2020-something, it kind of does. Also, as a philosophy major, my favorite question has always been Kiri Kin Thaw's first law of metaphysics: nothing that is unreal exists.
Yes, I also like that T. Plana Hoth is the matron of Vulcan philosophy. That was one of mine that I always remembered. And then it ends with a question: how do you feel? Which apparently was put in there by Amanda, his mother, because you're half human. The computer knows that, and Spock tries to say the question's irrelevant, but, you know, the feelings is something that Spock has to deal with.
I really like this interaction here between Spock and his mom, because Amanda is saying, as my son, you have feelings and they will surface. And Spock's response is, as you wish, since you deem them of value.
Right.
And that's such a great response. He's showing deference to his mother and being open to this, even though it doesn't make sense to him. He's still trusting his mom and willing to go along with this just because she values these things. And it's like, okay, I'm open to that.
Yeah.
Right. And he tells her, you know, I have to, you know, since you deem them of value, I will, you know, I will explore them, but I can't wait here to find them. I have to go to Earth. And she says, because of friendship? And he says, no, I'm going to testify because I was there. You know, just sort of logic. But he is going to go. And then there's this interesting interaction. She says, does the good of the many outweigh the good of the one? The central question of both Wrath of Khan in Search for Spock and now here. And he says, I would accept that the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. And she says, then you stand here because of, she says, a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everyone else put your good above theirs.
Yes.
Now, and this is very nice and moving and poetic, and it makes sense dramatically, and I accept it on that level. But as a philosopher, if I'm in Spock's position and she says, does the good of the many outweigh the good of the one? I would say you have to specify more variables. We can't use an overly simplistic utilitarian calculus. It's going to depend on the nature of the respective goods and harms in the cost-benefit calculus ratio involved in all of the relevant parties.
But of course, that one wouldn't fit in the movie. Two wouldn't throw back to Wrath of Khan.
But is there a trolley involved? That's what I want to know. So, so we cut back to Saratoga, where its power is being drained by the probe. So this is we are establishing that the probe has this ability to drain power from all their systems, and that the Starfleet Federation is powerless against them. And it doesn't seem to be a weapon. It seems to be just a function of the ship of the probe itself. So
the ship is oblivious to anything humans do.
Yes.
It's not trying to harm anybody. It's just doing its thing.
Right. Then we're back on the Klingon ship, whose bridge has been reconfigured since the last time, by the way. I mentioned that. It's a little different. Kirk does not sit on a dais above everybody.
They made it more human-centric while it was being refitted on Vulcan.
Yes. Yep. Kirk says goodbye to Savik.
For why? She was as much a part of this mutineer crew as anybody else.
Well, no, she was already there on the Grissom.
She was on Vulcan.
She was part of the. She was part of the.
But she was a witness.
She was part of the survey crew with Kirk's son.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she was a witness to the events.
She was a witness, and so there is a reason why she's staying, but it didn't make it on screen.
Yes.
The reason she's staying is teenage Spock had Ponfar on the Genesis planet, and she cooperated with that Ponfar experience.
Right.
And in it may be unfilmed, but at least it's not included in the final draft. In an either unfilmed or unincluded scene, she's staying on Vulcan because she's pregnant.
Right.
And they cut that. And so she stays behind for no obvious reason. It's like she's just ditching them.
Right.
Which the idea of, is there a child of Spock out there somewhere to show up in some future, episode of Picard, perhaps? So McCoy is worried that Spock isn't working on all thrusters. We get that. And he brings his concerns to Kirk, who kind of brushes him aside because Kirk clearly wants Spock to be the old Spock. He's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. I have complete confidence in him. Back at Earth, the probe is arriving. The signal is shutting everything. Yep.
Before that, as we're leaving Vulcan, Kirk orders the Klingon bird of prey to 1/4 impulse in an atmosphere.
Oh, that's not the worst. That's not the worst thing in the atmosphere. So
and it turns out that 1/4 impulse is around a mile a minute. It's very slow because we see this warbird take off and slowly taxi around and maybe go a few dozen or 100 feet in a few seconds. So 1/4 impulse, it turns out, is really, really slow.
It's more engine power than speed.
Yeah,
it's like saying it's like saying,
come on, just say thrusters on.
Yeah,
they do all kinds of stuff.
That's not the worst thing they do in atmosphere, but we'll talk about that at the end of the movie.
Yes, we will. So back at Earth, the probe is arriving. We've seen things like a transmission from the Yorktown that's deploying a solar sail to try to get power for the life support to keep them alive. Space Dock, the big space station there, is shutting down,
including with the Excelsior in Space Dock.
Yes, yep. The probes it then starts generating global rainstorms, covering the Earth in rain. We find out because the whales have not responded to its calls. So things are getting worse.
And so the probe can detect audio from whales of a specific species in the ocean and is oblivious to all of the chaos it's causing with these other technological systems on the planet.
I think it doesn't care.
This is a little improbable.
Yeah, well, I think for whatever reason, it doesn't care, or it thinks it's an infestation that's harming the conditions that it wanted to have there for the whales, perhaps, maybe? I don't know.
It just sees us as really advanced apes, maybe.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is it doesn't tell us any of this, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Although there is mention of problems in Leningrad, which of course after the fall of the Soviet Union is back to St. Petersburg.
Right. That was a little anachronism there. That's a lot of fun. Maybe in the future after World War III, it gets back to being Leningrad. So McCoy tries to bond with Spock about their shared experience of life, death, and life again. And Spock,
this was really nice.
Yeah,
I really liked the the McCoy Spock interaction here. It's clear the two of them at this point are, even though they still have some playful barbing going on, they're really friends, and it's really clear. And
although McCoy gets annoyed with Spock here.
Well, he does get annoyed with him. He's asking about one of the great mysteries. He says, and the first thing he says, which is really nice, is, "I may have carried your soul, but I couldn't fill your shoes." And that's just so generous and so nice of McCoy. And then he wants to know about death, because Spock has been there and back. And Spock ducks the question. He says it would be impossible to discuss it without a common frame of reference. And at which point I would say, so you're saying there is survival, because there would be no common frame of reference if we didn't survive death. You're indicating that there is something on the other side.
Well, to be fair, though, what Spock got back was his memories, his katra from before he died.
And this is what I would have said if I was the writer.
Right.
I would have said, the only thing I experienced was what happened when my katra was in your head. So we had exactly the same experience.
Well, it's it kind of a modern analogy is, I've got a backup hard drive on my laptop, and let's say it backs up 5 minutes before the laptop crashes. Well, I can't pull the data of the crash off the backup hard drive because it doesn't know the laptop crashed.
My computer can't tell me what the experience of crashing is like.
But his Katra did have some experience in McCoy's head where he's like talking as Spock through McCoy. So it's like, I dimly remember being in your quarters and talking to Kirk, and then I dimly remember you talking about something on the bridge. And, you know, he could cite all of the things McCoy did in persona Spock.
Right.
In that movie.
But we do get the fun line where he says, "Forgive me, Doctor, I'm receiving a number of distress calls." And McCoy says, "I don't doubt it."
Yeah.
So
whatever that means.
Yes. Sarek advises the Federation president, I think you should transmit a planetary distress signal. Things are dire on Earth, and probably not going to get any better. And they essentially send a message that, don't come here. Earth is lost. Which is kind of scary.
And they don't ask for help and send a data packet about the problem they're facing, which is weird. Maybe they sent that on a different channel.
I think they must have, because Uhura was able to pull up the sound of the probe, even though they were too far away to hear it themselves. We're talking about Starfleet Command. Both Commander Rand and Commander Chapel, Grace Lee Whitney and Majel Barrett are in there, although they have absolutely no speaking scenes whatsoever.
Right. They're there. Yep.
Majel Barrett does have one line about we need to get medical supplies routed here or there.
Yep.
Right.
Also, the Admiral says, because the cloud cover is covering Earth, says we can't survive without the sun. And I'm going, you're anticipating this is going to last for the centuries needed for all of the heat in the oceans to dissipate? That you're going to have global cooling for that long? Really?
Well, you'd probably kill off all the plant life on Earth without the.
It's going to take months or years for stuff to happen. I mean, it's not like black as night up there. It's just cloud cover.
Yeah, and I wonder too is what kind of power production does Starfleet have at that point on Earth? I would assume it's something based off of matter antimatter, but who knows?
Right. Yeah. Right. The losing all power, that's the real problem, because once you have no power in a technological society, that's when things break down into barbarism. So anyway, Spock guesses that the probe is not aimed at the human beings on Earth, but another life form, and figures out that it's humpback whales, but they're extinct by then, which is actually not true.
And I love how Spock is the only person in the Federation to be able to recognize the humpback signal, and he does it by ear.
Yep.
And then he confirms it with a Klingon database.
Well, no, they did say that they were tapped into the Federation database before they left Vulcan.
I was going to say that. I'm going to guess they downloaded a Federation database.
However, true to form, once they learn this, first thing Kirk wants to do is destroy the probe.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
We come in peace. Shoot to kill. Shoot to kill. Shoot to kill.
But Spock has a different idea. He says, let's go get some whales. McCoy...
let's TARDIS this thing.
McCoy realizes what he's suggesting and says, now wait just a dang minute. He says, like, he does not like this idea. This is worse than transporting.
I love when Kirk goes down to engineering to tell Scotty to get ready for time warp. He says, we need to go find some humpbacks. And Scotty is humpbacked people. It's like, what is just imagine the kind of scenario that Scotty is envisioning. What kind of adventure are we on now?
We're going to go find Quasimodo.
Humpback people. Well, I mean, again, if they've been extinct for hundreds of years, no one's even thought of humpback whales for a long time. So, Spock tells McCoy that he's had to program some of the time variables from memory, which McCoy responds with "Angels and Ministers of Grace defend us," which is Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 4. I mention that just because a friend of SQPN, Sean McCartney, uses that in his podcast, Just a Catholic Dad. He uses that line, and so I like the fact that I did not realize that was from Voyage Home. I didn't recognize the voice, but the Angels and Ministers of Grace defend us. Kirk here says before they go into their time warp, may fortune favor the foolish, which is an interesting use of that line, because later Sisko and Lorca will say may fortune favor the bold later on in DS9 in Discovery. So I just thought it was interesting. Then we get that weird, trippy time travel sequence.
I know. And so this is 30 minutes into the film when it's a quarter of the runtime before we even start going into the past, which is a fascinating structure. Really, the middle hour of the movie is the 20th century. The first 30 minutes and the last 30 minutes are the 23rd century. So it's a very interestingly structured movie. And even though the thing that everybody remembers is the 20th century stuff with maybe a scene at the beginning and the end, it's really half of the movie is in the 23rd century, half of the movie is in the 20th century. And then we have this totally hallucinogenic time travel trip into the past that it's like, okay, McCoy could have gotten you there much easier. All he needed to do was go down to the lab and sense some DMT.
Well, you could tell ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, was allowed to have some fun with that scene. Although, to be fair, I mean, I think that was a computer-generated scene, which, again, for 1986 was pretty revolutionary.
One of the things
we also hear lines of dialogue, some of which have not yet been said in the film. So, or some of which appear to be internal monologues, like Uhura is heard saying, "I never should have left Earth." And so it is, as we're seeing the trippy stuff on the screen, we're getting these lines of dialogue that are significant, but some of them will come up later in the film, and some of them are never said.
So, judging by the pollution content of the atmosphere, they've arrived in the later half of the 20th century, which is fun, and they're flying over San Francisco.
Oh, I just had a few notes before we shift to the San Francisco stuff.
Okay.
So the humpback, this is an implausibility, but the humpback whales apparently have not had contact with the whale probe in human history.
Right.
But they're still speaking the same language because they're able to talk to the probe. Also, I want to know, and that's implausible because language should change for them over millennia.
Mm-hmm.
Also, once the crew of the ship has realized this is humpback whale speech, they should have told the Federation that, and then the Federation should have tried playing recordings that were made of humpback whales from before they were extinct.
Didn't they address that? They said they would be just speaking
they
gibberish
said that
to
they
them.
could. Yeah, they said they could try to generate with computer.
Yeah, that's for computer generated, but and it would be gibberish. It would sound like the right voice, but it would be nonsense stuff. But cetacean biologists have been recording whales since the 20th century, and they don't go extinct until the 21st. So they should have lots of archival recordings of actual whale song that is meaningful. And even if it's not what the probe is looking for, you could maybe at least delay the probe or start to make contact with the probe using those recordings. And they don't explore that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, but to be fair, I mean, to make the counter argument, it'd be like the probe is saying, "Hello, I'm here," and the whales are saying, "I would like a cheeseburger and fries, thanks."
They're singing "Can't Down Racist."
Nonsensical. I mean, it would be recordings, but it would be recordings that could be nonsensical.
Right. Agreed. They would be out of context speech, but it would be meaningful. It could at least help make the probe think maybe they're down there. And,
that's possible. Okay.
So it would be something that could be tried.
And they do basically say in that message to Starfleet Command that we're going back in time and this is why.
Right.
So.
Right. Maybe, and if there were more time between when they left and when they came back, they might have been trying that, I suppose. But they actually come back in the instant that they leave. There's that breaking of the window, which is actually a nice film device to kind of say this is the same moment. That was clever of them.
Structurally, the fact they're about to save the world is what allows them to get away with the events of the previous movie.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. This is about putting them back on the Enterprise by the end of this movie, so we can have more movies. So Scotty says the Klingon dilithium crystals are decrystallizing, and so losing power. So Spock comes up with this idea to collect high-energy particles from a naval ship nuclear reactors. While Chekhov
use high-energy photons.
Yes.
Which are a real thing.
Yes.
Yep. They're not what powers a fission reactor, though. It's not high-energy photons. It's neutron radiation.
But you'd find them in there, I suppose. That's one place you could find them.
This is a scientific issue with this.
They must have got the idea from Queen What's-Her-Name from the short treks.
Yeah, right. So Sulu, Scotty, and McCoy, meanwhile, are going to be tasked with building the whale tanks while Spock and Kirk go find the whales.
So we're dividing the crew up into teams, and each team has something to do. And this is a classic issue with Star Trek because there's a good bit of resentment among the actors that only 3 of them consistently get anything to do.
Right.
And the others, sometimes, like by the time of Star Trek Generation, some of them said, "There's nothing here for my character to do. I'm not even going to appear in this movie," even though they were invited. And this is the most effective movie in terms of, I think, of giving everybody something meaningful to do that advances the plot.
Yep.
Uhura has kind of maybe the least, but even she gets stuff to do. Although some of it is like, she's receiving whale song from orbit. How? Do you have a microphone down in the ocean?
Sensors.
Same way the probe does. Apparently.
Star Trek sensors are like the Doctor's sonic screwdriver. They just do whatever you need the plot to do. So they land in Golden Gate Park, which, by the way, the real Golden Gate Park is huge. It's not like you think a little city park. It is like a forest in the middle of a city, so it's plausible that you could be somewhere where you're not in a high traffic area. Although they're in the middle of a playing field. Apparently nobody uses it, and the Klingon cloak makes the material of the ship itself invisible. It's not the shields around it. This is a little bit different from what we've seen of cloaking devices in the past. But,
so they flatten a garbage can when they land, which is really cool. And you can see the garbage can under the impression of the bird of prey's foot in the ground. And that scares the garbage men off. And these garbage men these San Francisco garbage men are much less intimidating and ominous than the San Francisco garbage men in the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Okay. I'll take your word for that one. It is funny. I like the thing, did you see that? No, I didn't. And you didn't either. as they ride off. I did think funny later on when we do see the garbage can smash on the ground under the impression of we see the grass waving in the wind under the foot.
That's funny.
A little bit. The detail they would not miss today. Kirk gives that line as they come out of it. The classic line. Everybody remember where we parked, which is a
great line.
Great line. They walk into San Francisco and they're they walk in front of the traffic on the street, and the guy curses at him. And Kirk gives the double dumb bleep on you line back, and a little blue humor
the cars were definitely of their time. It was kind of fun to see all the old, early to mid 80s cars.
Yep. They're still using money in the 20th century too.
So actually the you can say it, the double dumbass on you line is funny in that Kirk is inappropriately using cursing. He doesn't really know how 20th century insults work.
Right.
And he's trying to roll with it. So there's an element of humor there. But also, and they address this later in the film explicitly, this is the first time we've had any kind of cursing on Star Trek.
Right.
And they justify it by saying, we're in the 20th century, this is how everybody talks, we're trying to fit in. But Spock calls Kirk out on his use of colorful metaphors. And they have this conversation about it on the bus. And so this is kind of, I think, better handled. They do really kind of dive in and have a good bit of this, but it's all pretty low-level stuff. Nobody drops the F-bomb.
Right.
And it comes across as a much more believable way to deal with the issue of taboo language on Star Trek than what we get in Discovery, where they just drop the F-bomb out of nowhere.
For absolutely no reason whatsoever, just so that they can say, look at how edgy we are because we did this.
Yeah. But here it makes, if they're going to do it, which they didn't have to, they could have left all that out. But if they're going to do it, they did it better here than they did in Discovery.
Right.
And they even get some additional humor value out of it because Kirk is explaining to Spock on the bus, I'm doing it because I'm trying to fit in. This is how everybody talks. You see it in all the literature of the time. And Spock says, like who? And he says, well, Jacqueline Suzanne and Harold Robbins, who were and Spock says, the
Giants.
which is hilarious because, and people today may not know this as much, but Jacqueline Suzanne and Harold Robbins were astoundingly successful authors in the mid and late 20th century who were known for writing trashy books.
Yes.
And so there's no way they would be considered giants.
Literary
in our
giants.
Day.
Most people
Literary
today
giants.
have never heard of them.
Yeah.
And we're only 40 years away, 35 years apart from that.
Right.
Yeah, but
right.
I love the irony of in the 23rd century, they're considered 20th century Shakespeare's, even though today they're known for just writing popular trashy novels.
Right. And speaking of the colorful language, we're going to get Spock using some of it where badly, they're not the hell your whales and things like that.
Yeah.
And the great one is where he turns to Kirk and says, "Are you sure this isn't a time for a colorful metaphor?" Which is a great line. So I mentioned that Kirk notices that they're still using money in the 20th century, which again, he and Spock and McCoy have been in the 20th century before.
Yeah.
The Guardian at the Edge of Forever.
But I can forgive him that, but I always assume and when this movie came out, I assume because we have this, and then when they're buying pizza, and Jillian says to him, "You don't use money?" And he says, "We don't." All that means in context, or all it needs to mean, is we don't carry cash.
Yes. Because I don't carry
cash. They took it in this ridiculous thing in this ridiculous direction of they literally have no money.
I wonder though if this
totally unbelievable.
If this was a Roddenberry, because of course that was his big thing for TNG was they didn't have cash in the 24th century.
Yeah. So in order to get some money, Kirk sells his spectacles that McCoy gave him for his birthday. And these are apparently 18th century antiques that he was toting around on his face, which in the 24th century would have been priceless museum pieces. Even today would be
money. So
yeah.
I love we've got a predestination paradox here because Spock says, "Weren't those a birthday present from Dr. McCoy?" And Kirk says, "And the beauty is they will be again." So the implication is it's the same pair of glasses. Nobody ever manufactured these.
Yes. And that was a good line. And, I'll give you $100 for them. Is that a lot? And the guy kind of shrugs, goes, "Maybe." Then Spock has this thing where he's going to find the whales using vectoring and a bus map, the bus ad, and instead Kirk sees the ad on the bus for George and Gracie at the Cetacean Institute, and they get on the bus.
We should explain George and Gracie for people who may not be aware, because a lot of younger people may not know who they are. George Burns and Gracie Allen were a pair of mid-20th century comedians who were very famous. They had a show together, the George Burns Show, and they were Gracie was played the kooky character. George Burns was the straight man.
Yep.
And at the end of every show,
they're also married, by the way.
Yeah, they were married. And at the end of every show, George would tell Gracie to say goodnight, Gracie, meaning to the audience, and she'd say, "Good night, Gracie."
Right. Classic line. And so the whales are named after George and Gracie. And so they get on the bus, and then they have to walk off the bus, and Spock says, "What does this mean, exact change?" Which is a little historical anachronism there. Then we have Spock, McCoy, and Sulu walking through Chinatown. Now, originally, we talk about versions of the movie that weren't made. Originally, this was supposed to be a scene where Sulu encounters his ancestor, his great-great-great-great-grandfather here. And they were going to film the scene, but the child actor who was supposed to play it got so nervous that they ended up not filming it, which is a shame.
Yeah,
but
because his mom was on the set watching, and apparently she was a tiger mom or something.
But there's the implication. Yeah. So they find not fiberglass, plexiglass, by looking up in the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages, which, for those of you under the age of about 30, that was a big book that everybody who had a telephone used to get. That list, that was basically Google for the 20th century in paper form.
For phone numbers.
For phone numbers, yes. So Scotty and McCoy are in the factory, and they, let's see, I'm trying to think if I'm jumping ahead here, but he says normally we could convert the tanks using transparent aluminum, but we don't have that. And so they
have the great scene where he's with the computer.
Right. I'm trying to think of I think this is where this happens. So yeah, they go to this factory. They talk with the plant manager. He's pretending to be a professor from Scotland, and McCoy is his assistant. And they he wants to trade for the plexiglass that they'll need. There's really thick plexiglass, and he says, "Well, what if I gave you the formula for transparent aluminum?" And he has this great scene with the Macintosh where he sits down and says, "Computer," and it doesn't respond, and he says, "Just use the." And he uses the mouse.
McCoy gives him the mouse, and he tries talking into the mouse.
Yes, that's right. And he says, "Just use the keyboard." A keyboard, how quaint! And then he does the James Doohan does this random typing, which
with 2
manipulates
fingers and way too few keystrokes to generate what he's generating on the screen
in a graphical interface, by the way.
Yeah,
and
on a Mac Plus, which wasn't known for its keyboard friendliness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But this was the what I was talking about before, the Mac. I mean, this was the moment when Mac really hit the popular consciousness. This is 1986, so a couple years in, but people loved this. It was a great scene. And the funny thing is a lot of this scene inspired so much computer technology in the future. People have been trying to develop these voice interfaces with computers, partly because of this, and of previous Star Trek stuff, of course, but partly because of this, although Siri still isn't quite there yet.
And we now have transparent aluminum. It really exists.
Exactly. And
they call it Alon, but it's
inspired by this movie. Yeah, that's the thing I think is amazing is we have transparent aluminum because someone said, I wonder if we could do that because I saw this in a movie.
Or because Scotty actually did come back in time and give it to this guy, and this guy is the guy who actually invented it. No, I'm kidding.
And meanwhile, Sulu is hanging around at the outside with the guy with the Huey helicopter, learning how to fly it. Apparently flying something like it in his Academy days. What possibly could he have been flying at the Starfleet Academy?
Shuttlecraft are exactly like flying a helicopter, don't you know?
But we also know that Sulu is like a historical geek. I mean, he's into historical weapons. I would assume he's into historical aircraft too.
Right, that's true.
And who knows? Maybe for navigators, they have them fly like replicas of historic aircraft to understand where they are now based on where they've been. I don't know. I'm making that up.
Well, and there are groups that are dedicated to historic aviation, like the Confederate Air Force, where they fly historical planes that are not in service anymore.
That's true. This is true.
That's true.
So we'll have a great scene of him flying the plexiglass to the bird of prey. Meanwhile, this is the great scene. This is
this is what everybody thinks of for Voyage Home is this scene right here.
We have Chekhov, who's Russian with this really bad Russian accent, Walter Koenig's terrible Russian accent, walking around asking people for directions to the naval base in Alameda,
which is
where they have
vessels.
The nuclear vessels.
And they ask the cop, and the cop just kind of stares at him like, "You're Russian," and asking me like, "What is like?" And in fact, it turns out
the cop says nothing.
Yes,
nobody
just looks
says
at
anything at first.
In fact, when they filmed the scene, nobody was supposed to respond. None of the extras was supposed to answer them. But the one actress who did was so funny that they kept it in. Like, she totally blew it. And they had to get her into the union and all this other stuff because she was an extra.
Well, I actually believe, I thought I read something once where the cop was actually like a police officer provided by the San Francisco PD as security, and they just walked right up to him, ad-libbed it.
Oh, really?
And so that's why, and he was told, if something like this happens, you just don't talk. And that's why he's standing there just blank-faced.
Yeah. Which really doesn't make any sense, but it makes for a nice scene. Popular Mechanics has 50 greatest moments of science fiction movies, and this is number 50.
Oh,
on
wow.
The list.
Yeah.
The nuclear vessels.
Nuclear vessels.
And the woman, they're walking up to all the extras saying, can you tell us where the naval base in Alameda is? And no one's answering. And finally, the one woman, when she's asked where the nuclear vessels, she says, "Oh yeah, they're at the naval base in Alameda." And it's like, I know this. I know where is Alameda. But she's walked off by that point.
Yeah, that's what I just said, Alameda. But where's Alameda? So then we have Spock on the bus. That scene going across the Golden Gate Bridge to Sausalito, where the Cetacean Institute is, and they meet the punk rock kid in the punk rock gear who plays the song "I Hate You" on the boom blaster,
which the actor wrote.
Well, let me tell you about the guy who plays the punk rocker. He was Leonard Nimoy's assistant on the movie. He was,
that's funny.
He begged to be put in this scene because he was a punk rock fan. And so when he finally showed up to the set in this costume, complete with dog collar, fake nose piercings, and leopard print Converse sneakers, one of the first people he bumped into was DeForest Kelley, and he says, this is a quote, "He looks me up and down real slowly, and with that kind of southern laconic drawl, he just says, 'Nice shoes.'" And he walks away. I thought, that is so awesome. So his name is Kirk Thatcher, which is awesome. It's a Star Trek name. He also wrote the lyrics to the song "I Hate You," and he actually went on to have a very good career in Hollywood in the behind the scenes doing, directing and that sort of stuff. So a lot of fun there. I love that scene. Another one of those scenes that everyone remembers from the movie. Where Spock...
Basically, he's a jerk. He's playing his boombox way too loud. He won't turn it off. He even turns it up. And so Spock finally neck pinches him, and everyone on the bus applauds.
Yes. Yep. By the way, did you see the guy in the bus reading Omni magazine?
Yes, I did.
Something out of the 80s.
I used to read Omni magazine.
Yes. Another 80s thing there. At the Cetacean Institute. So cetacean is the fancy word for whales and whale-like creatures. Right.
Dolphins stuff. Yeah.
Mammals in the sea. There's a tour that Kirk and Spock go on, led by Dr. Gillian Taylor. And did you see the nuns on the tour? The nuns on the tour.
Because every film in this period had to have nuns or a priest in the background somewhere.
For some reason. It's
now,
so
this
funny.
is getting into church politics, but there were more nuns in habit in movies than there were in real life at this point. But
yeah, right. So let's talk about, they give us the spiel about whales and whale hunting and all that sort of thing. Now, at the time, there was a moratorium on whaling that had been enacted that year, 1986. But there were a handful of countries that didn't sign on.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, they're totally whale shaming Russia and Japan here.
Yeah. Yep. Today, very few humpbacks are actually hunted, and they're not even considered threatened anymore. They're classified as...
They're recovering quite well, actually.
Right. They're under the least concern conservation status is how it's listed. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe this movie had some effect on that. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting to think about that. But in any case,
or maybe another movie from this time period about whales, the horror movie Orca. In this movie, Gillian tells about how the whaling nations that are unnamed, but she's thinking of like Russia, Japan, and Norway, and Iceland, that they will even harvest female whales with calves, with unborn calves.
Right.
And that happens in the movie Orca, and Daddy Orca gets revenge on the humans who did it. So
I thought you were going to say
have been part of it too.
I thought you were going to say the Bill Clinton story called Free Willy, but that might be something else.
That's totally different.
So we are told that the Cetacean Institute has the largest saltwater tank in the world, and Kirk says, "This is perfect. We've got 2 whales right here, ready for the taking. We'll take him from here." Of course, we find out that they're going to be let go into the ocean right away because timing and plot. And Gillian says, "Oh, the whales, they go inside and they're looking through the glass. Oh, the whales sing. We don't know why they sing." And then the lady gives that classic line, "Maybe they're singing to that man in there." We see Spock swimming in the tank, doing a mind meld with the whale.
Yeah.
And then we have Spock, who doesn't have the hang of the knack of the colorful metaphors. They're not the hell your whales.
Yeah. Afterwards, Kirk explains to Gillian that Spock was in, and this is a nice attempt to knit their story into real history. He says that Spock was in the free speech movement at Berkeley in the 60s, but he did too much LDS, thus making the day of every Mormon in the theater audience.
Yes, that's right. He's too many Latter-day Saints. And then later on, when Gillian is with they kick Kirk and Spock out. They actually, in reality, would be arrested, but they were kicked out. And Gillian's talking to the Institute's director. She's the deputy director of the Institute, and he says, we have to let him go. But after all, they're only whales, they're not people. And she says, "I don't know about you, but my compassion for someone is not limited to my estimate of their intelligence." And that's sort of an ironic line, given the fact that they're intelligent enough that an alien species is interested in them and not human beings. So there's a little bit of irony there.
On the other hand, I'm like, so you have enormous empathy for microbes.
Right. for all creatures. She doesn't step on any bugs.
Yeah.
Chekhov and Uhura, meanwhile, have found the Enterprise, the aircraft carrier Enterprise. And
which is awesome. It's awesome. Even
yes.
if it's not the real Enterprise, it's still awesome.
Just the connection
it's awesome
is
that
cool.
they find it. Yes, it is. That I remember like seeing that and being, this is cool. Because remember, when we saw this in the theaters, there was no Enterprise anymore. The Starship Enterprise was gone, and this was a real nice connection to it. You have to have an Enterprise in a Star Trek movie, and so we thought this was our Enterprise. Little did we know. So Jillian sees Kirk and Spock walking away from Sausalito. They're actually in the Marina District of San Francisco. They're not going to San Francisco. They're in San Francisco, but small point. She calls him Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, which I thought was a nice line because Spock's in the bathrobe.
Robe.
And let me give you a ride back. And Spock, we have that thing where Spock did too much LDS. And she says, I have a photographic memory. I see words. Jimmy? Photographic memories?
So that's actually synesthesia, but I mean, you can. There are partially eidetic memories, but nothing is going to give you. Very few people have literal total recall.
Right.
This is kind of a myth.
Yes.
Yep.
But Spock does drop that Gracie is pregnant, which causes her to slam on the brakes. How do you know that? Nobody knows that. Gracie does.
Yeah, that's an awesome line.
That is good.
Also, like as she's dropping him off, because she and Kirk are going to go get dinner.
Yes.
And Kirk's going to do his Kirk thing.
Yeah.
But they're dropping Spock off in the park, and Jillian says, "You sure you won't change your mind?" And he looks at her and says, "Is there something wrong with the one I have?"
Right. Spock being obtusely literal. This is actually where we have the scene of Spock, Scotty and McCoy and Sulu at the factory. I failed to point out that McCoy kind of pulls him aside after he makes that transparent aluminum formula on the Mac. He says, are you sure we should be altering the future by giving him this formula? He goes, how do you know he didn't invent the thing? And McCoy kind of gets this conspiratorial look like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So maybe that's what it is. He got it.
That's my
1966.
reference about this is the guy that made the Elon.
Yes. So yes, we drop off Spock to wander in the park while they go to dinner, and Kirk has dinner with her. And interesting here, Kirk's charms, his romantic charms, do not work on Jillian. There is no sense of romantic attraction between the two of them.
She's
really
more interested in what is he doing there? Why does he know why do they know what they know? What's going on?
Yeah, I don't feel like there was ever any, like, I think Kirk tries to get some going, but I don't feel like she's buying it.
No.
Yeah, Kirk is definitely trying to get stuff going, but not necessarily to go all the way with her, but to at least get on her good side. And she is a tough customer in that regard. She stays focused. I think she likes Kirk. Otherwise, she wouldn't be wasting her time with him.
Right.
But, I think she's fascinated. I think the way I would put it is fascinated by him.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have some nice stuff. At one point, his communicator beeps, and she says, "You have a pocket pager," which at the time was like, "Oh, advanced tech," and now it's like lame. And do you also bash rocks together?
Yeah.
Well,
and
today should say it's your cell phone.
Yeah, and then Kirk picks it up and says, "I told you never to call me," which is a classic line from television,
right?
That would get used all the time in this period. And then the two of them have this passive-aggressive chuckling contest where they're looking at each other and there's kind of this standoff and they're just kind of going, and they're passive-aggressively chuckling at each other to avoid talking. But finally, Kirk tells her, "I'm from the late 23rd century on your calendar." And this is the first definite establishment of when Star Trek is set.
Oh, right.
Because they were always ambiguous about it in the original series. There are lines in individual episodes that could suggest anywhere between 200 and 800 years in the future. And so this is the first time they lock it down to a particular century and even a part of a century. They're 300 years ahead of us.
And they have this discussion where Kirk is trying to convince her, tell me the frequency of the transmitters that you're going to put on the whales. When they're going right away, we're told. They're going to be flown out in a special 747 tomorrow or something like that. And
it's like noon the next day, yeah.
Yeah, and she's intrigued. She doesn't really believe him, but where would you take them if you could? And yeah, he tells her he's from the 23rd century. And she said, well, first she says, let me guess, you're from outer space. And he says, no, I only work in outer space. I'm from Iowa, which is a nice line. And then, and so then that when she tells them they're going to go at noon tomorrow, we have to go right away. And they get up to leave when the waiter brings the pizza to them.
Yep.
And she says, we're going to take that to go. Let me guess, they don't have money in the 20th century. And Kirk says, well, they don't. And so she has to pay for dinner.
Yeah, they also apparently don't have pizza in the 23rd century because Kirk has no idea how to hold a pizza box. When we see him back at the park, he's holding it basically vertically. And it's like, that pizza is going to fall apart in there and you're going to have cheese all over the lid of your box.
Exactly. I wonder if Shatner did that on purpose, because, he would know. So on board the Enterprise in the nuclear reactor, Chekhov and Uhura collect their particles.
And this makes no sense because they've got shield, so high energy photons. Okay,
Light.
Yep,
that's a thing. But you know what blocks high energy photons? Shielding, and this reactor is covered in shielding. Now, number one, its purpose is not to generate high energy photons; it's to generate neutrons that will then heat the water in and drive a steam turbine. But okay, maybe there are some high energy photons that'll be released as part of this process, but they're not going to make it through the shielding because if they did in appreciable numbers, people would be dying.
Yeah.
Maybe the device changes the shielding in one location to absorb
the little phaser drill that drilled into the like a little pinprick into the shielding,
or
transports
them, or changes the molecular structure.
You guys can headcanon it. I even have in my notes, maybe it reaches through the shielding somehow, but they didn't set any of this up. They just threw a science term into the script, and they didn't think about how this would really work.
In other words, a typical Star Trek episode. Oh, I mean,
yeah.
So somehow the device they're using does cause a power drain in the system. It causes the reaction to go down.
Which it wouldn't, because if they're collecting high-energy photons, those are a byproduct of the neutron-released power system.
Maybe it's a byproduct of whatever device they're using.
Well, you're headcanoning again. This is not made clear in the script.
It is not. Right. But it is used to make a high drama. Scotty can only beam Uhura out at first because the Klingon's powers is down. The batteries are drained, and they don't have a spare backup battery. So Chekhov, of course, is the one who is captured and interrogated. The Russian, not Uhura. The interrogation is funny. What are you doing here? Where are you from? Starfleet. He's got the Starfleet ID on him, and he tries to stun them, but the phaser malfunctions, and so we get this wonderful chase through the ship, with real Marines, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of the Navy crew were real Navy and Marines.
Yeah,
and with Russian music.
Yes, the
playing
Russian
in the background, which is nice as Chekhov is running. And remember, folks, this is the Cold War.
Yes,
this is the 1980s. Yeah. The Soviet Union was a thing.
I mean, this was towards the end of the Cold War, but we didn't know that at the time. This was actually one of the hotter periods of the Cold War.
Yeah,
right. We had near misses with nuclear war in the 80s, and so this was a really high drama time, and dropping Chekhov into this situation is great.
Right.
Because he was always a symbol of future reconciliation, but we're unreconciled at this point.
Right.
And so you have Chekhov is caught. He's carrying Starfleet ID.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't just try to lie his way out of this. Also, his knowledge of English suddenly fails him as he starts taking things overly literally.
Yes.
Even though he's been talking to English speakers all of his career in Starfleet.
This is a problem in Star Trek in general, by the way. Whenever they travel back in time, they suddenly become very literal about the way they talk and very dumb about idioms and things like that. I have to say, this is one of my criticisms for time travel in Star Trek. The Voyager will do this too.
We also have the crewmen who are interrogating him. One of them says, "What do you think?" And the other one says, "He's a Rusky." And the first one says, "I know, but he's some kind of Rusky retard." And it's like, whoa, man, double woke policy offenses. You can't call someone either a Rusky or a retard now.
I think actually Rusky is now acceptable because of what's in the news. But retard is what is now the R word. that is and I apologize for anyone if you feel offended by it, but that is a word that was used commonly throughout the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s that has suddenly become a word that you cannot use at all
for
in
any
play
circumstance,
company.
for any reason.
Yes.
Even if you talk about retarding an engine, people will freak out. Well, that's an actual thing. You're retarding the power performance of the engine, the timing of the engine.
It's a perfectly useful word in many contexts. I would now you obviously calling someone that is can be cruel.
It's offensive,
but don't be cruel to people.
It wasn't used. I mean, I have no memory of it being used for people who actually suffered from mental disabilities. You wouldn't use it to their face.
Yeah.
Right.
It was what it was used for were people who were inappropriately acting foolishly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So it would be it's a movie of its time, and so we accept it as it is. So we have this chase through the ship, and Chekhov gets to the edge of the deck.
Also, his phaser doesn't work, he thinks, because of radiation on the ship, and it's like, no, there is no appreciable the number of the amount of radiation you get on a ship has to be within human safety limits. There's no way that would interfere with a phaser.
Right. That's
because I mean, phasers will work on planets with high natural radiation, but suddenly this man-made "quote unquote" radiation on the reactor ship.
It's a Klingon phaser to be fair, and maybe it's just shoddy.
They could have just completely taken that whole idea out. Just he shoots it and it goes, I must have dropped it.
Yeah, or the battery's drained. Yeah, something. Yeah. Anyway, he falls off the edge of the deck to the wharf below, and he's injured. And this fun little chase ends in this dramatic moment. Meanwhile, Jillian shows up the next day at the Cetacean Institute, and the whales are already gone. Well, we did it while you were out last night, so we thought it would be easier for you, Jillian. Patronizing pat on the head, and she gives him a well-deserved slap in the face, which was. I'm glad that's one way to quit.
Which, according to what I read, she actually connected in real life. She actually slapped the actor, and he was not happy about it.
Yeah, he looked stunned. But that's one way to quit your job. So it was interesting. I mean, thankfully, she doesn't have to go back, as we'll find out. So she decides to go to Kirk. That's her last hope to save the whales, because she assumes that once the whales are out in the open ocean, we didn't say this before, is they're going to be hunted and killed. That's just the assumption is they're not.
And she's right about that. Which is what we're going to see in a few minutes.
Right. So then we have Sulu flying the Huey over Golden Gate Park with the plexiglass. She shows up there and she sees him lowering the plexiglass into the invisible ship. And Scotty half of Scotty yelling down inside, Admiral, we've got a problem.
But by the way, Sulu doesn't have, and part of it's because his ancestor scene got cut.
Yes.
But he doesn't have that much to do in this movie, and his job of bringing the aluminum with the helicopter is pretty minimal. But there is a funny moment where, as he's flying, we get a close-up of him through the windscreen.
Yes.
As he accidentally turns on a windshield wiper and doesn't know what to do. But if you look closely, the windshield wiper blade was broken. And so a crewman had to manually move it. And if you look closely, you can see the finger of the film crewman moving the blade back and forth. That made it into the theatrical cut.
That's awesome. So Kirk beams Jillian aboard the bird of prey, and his first words are to her, "Hello, Alice. Welcome to Wonderland," which is a nice line. He tells her we can't leave because we're a ship missing a crewman. And it says they found Chekhov, that he's in the hospital. And Spock says, well, we have to help him, even though it's not the logical thing to do. It's the human thing to do. So Spock has gotten in touch with his human side.
And even though power is fully restored, they haven't thought of beaming him out.
Apparently, yes. Maybe they can't. They've located him by reports, but they can't locate his life signs because he doesn't have a communicator on.
Because when they go to the hospital, they have to actually go look at the charts and figure out where he's at.
Right. So it's Kirk, McCoy, and Jillian as their local tour guide. They go to the hospital. They're dressed in scrubs. McCoy encounters the woman in the hallway. "What are you in here for?" "I'm waiting for dialysis, kidney failure." Then he gives her pills to and says, "Call me in the morning." And then
Then he also hears Doctor. I love his line because Uhura has been listening to the phone and says he's in emergency surgery. He's in critical condition. He's not expected to live. And McCoy says, "Jim, don't leave him in the hands of 20th century medicine."
Right.
Which is awesome. as a line from McCoy's perspective. It then sets us up for these things where, like, he gives the pill to the woman who's in for dialysis. He hears a couple of doctors talking in the
elevator.
In the elevator about chemotherapy, and McCoy is like exasperated with the thought of chemotherapy, which
Sounds
is a
like
really blunt instrument.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Sounds like the
Curing
Spanish
cancer.
Inquisition, he says.
Yeah. And frankly, from a 23rd century perspective, that's probably how we would look back on chemotherapy, because what it does is you poison the patient,
Yes.
hoping to kill the cancer and not the patient.
Well, it'd be the equivalent of saying, going back to the 17th century and having them treat a broken leg or something like that.
Right, treat you with leeches. Well,
Yeah.
as we've established in Star Trek, they have pills for radiation. They treat you, pills for cancer.
Hyronolin.
Yes, hyronolin treatment. Yeah. Yes, I was trying to remember that. So, yes, the doctor McCoy says it's like the Spanish Inquisition, and then they find Chekhov. They find the room who's being treated. They somehow trick the guards, the cops.
The cops aren't very bright.
They're not very bright.
I love the line here where McCoy says that Jillian, who's on the gurney, has immediate postprandial upper abdominal distension, which is a real thing. It means immediately after eating a meal, you get bloated and have stomach pain, or as he explains it to Jim in a minute, cramps.
Yeah,
right.
But then he also appears to misuse a couple of bits of medical jargon, because when the guards balk at letting them through, he says, "Do you want an acute case?" And acute in medical context just normally means sudden onset, and it's already if it's immediate postprandial, then you've already had sudden onset.
Again, this is the cops don't know that. It just sounds intimidating.
Yeah. If it's an acute case, it's important. Yes.
But then when he's in the surgical theater and he's talking to the surgeon and he's describing the symptoms and says, "What would you do with these symptoms?" And the guy says, "Fundoscopic examination." And okay, fundoscopic examination means looking in his eyeballs with a tool. I mean, not drilling holes in his head, which is how McCoy interprets it. It just means looking in his eyes to try to figure out what's going on with these symptoms.
Well, to be fair, he says fundoscopic examination. McCoy interrupts. That's unrevealing. So that the doctor is saying,
true.
Well, then we'll do a simple evacuation of the expanding epidural hematoma.
Okay.
Really,
that's right.
But it all amounts to McCoy like, oh my gosh, this is stone knives and bearskins, to steal a line from a different episode of Star Trek, and drilling holes in the man's head. And so Kirk ushers them into another room and phases the door to keep them in there. And McCoy, we're dealing with medievalism here, puts the device on his head and wakes up Chekhov. Name, Pavel, talk to me. Name, rank. Pavel Chekhov, rank Admiral. Yeah, he's a
great line. And then we have cheery escape music as they're racing out of the hospital, and we meet the dialysis lady again, and she is so happy. She's telling someone, "The doctor gave me a pill and I grew a new kidney." And we hear a doctor saying it's fully functional.
Yes. And they escape by going into an elevator and beaming out before the cops can get to the elevator when it reaches the next floor. So they beam not onto the bird of prey, but outside the bird of prey back in Golden Gate Park. And McCoy and Chekhov walk up the ramp, and the ramp closes. And Kirk is, "Okay, thanks, give me the frequency." And she's like, no, I'm coming with you. And he's like, "No, this is a one-way trip." So, she gives him the frequency. And then as he's being beamed out, she jumps into the beam. So dangerous. She's lucky they didn't end up as one meat puddle.
Apparently, there are safety factors to address that issue. Otherwise, we'd have people. Now, you must stand very far back from me for your own safety every time there's a beam out.
Right.
Also, there's something else that's neat with her and the beaming, because previously she beamed onto the ship and she felt the beam before the visual effect materialized. So she's not reacting to the visual effect. She's feeling it as it happens to her. So apparently, at least this kind of transporter causes you to feel something as you go through it.
Well, I suppose there's a sensor pass before the beam actually activates, and maybe that's what she felt.
Something like that.
I don't know.
Annular confinement beam. Anyway, They Scott.
But once she's beamed on board, Kirk doesn't make any attempt at all to return her.
No. She's you've made your choice. We're going. Spock, where the hell is that power you promised me? And Spock says, 1 damn minute, Admiral, which is a good line. And then they go and the bird of prey heads out to the Bering Sea to go get the whales. Scotty says that we'll need to be. It's going to be tough because we're going to need to be able to transport 400 tons. I'm glad that they make this point because it's not just the whales; they have to bring up all the water for the whales with them. So I like that. Spock says, well, I'm going to need to account for the additional weight as to get us back at the right moment in time. So he's another nice point. The variables have changed since they've come here, and now the ship is different. And we've got to account for that. It's got to do it from memory. And McCoy tells Spock nobody's perfect with evident glee. It's a lot of fun.
And just guess.
Yes, he's going to have to guess. Now we have this Russian whaling ship. I think it's Russian. I kind of guessed.
It's actually they're speaking Norwegian. Yeah, if I recall correctly.
Yep. All right. So a Norwegian whaling ship, sorry for the Russians, is closing on the whales, and they end up. We have this dramatic moment, and the ship gets there just in time and shoots a harpoon and bounces off the side of the bird of prey.
Really nasty looking harpoon because we've been bonding with these whales, and then we see this harpoon gun. It's not a hand-thrown harpoon. It's a gun.
Nowadays, it's a cannon.
Big thing harpoon into one of these whales that we love.
Yep. So Scotty beams him aboard, and we have a quote. Kirk gives,
but it like hits the invisible ship, and it's like clunk and falls into the water.
Yes, that was a nice moment.
And then the ship decloaks, and it's huge compared to the whaling vessel, so it's really intimidating.
The face of the guy as he's turning the wheel, like, ah.
Well, all of a sudden you got this big torpedo launcher right in your face, like, let's get out of here.
So the whales are beamed aboard, and Kirk quotes D.H. Lawrence from Whales Weep Not. They say the sea is cold, but the seas contain the hottest blood of all. I think he has this at his fingertips, has he been preparing for this, in his spare time? I don't know, but
he was Googling Klingon Wikipedia quotables during this. Yeah,
Shakespeare's in there, so D.H. Lawrence must be in there too. So in the original Klingon. So
Women in Love, the Klingon version.
So after the time trip, this time through, we don't see all the weird special effects, and they're still awake. Last time they were knocked out.
Before the time shift, there's the other time that they did something in the atmosphere that they should not do. They went into warp in atmosphere.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, if in theory, that should cause like damage to the atmosphere, but apparently not.
Yes, we've had other times where we're told they can't go to warp in the atmosphere. Just like you can't jump to hyperspace in Star Wars in the atmosphere until you have to.
Yep.
So they time trip. They're still awake. The ship is out of control because of the alien probe, and they end up crashing into the bay, San Francisco Bay, and they have to abandon ship by jumping into the water. So most of the crew on the bridge jumps through the escape hatch that's there conveniently. But Kirk has to go down to the hangar, which is, or the not hangar, but the bay, cargo bay, where the whales are, and Scotty and Jillian, which is filling up with water, and he has to open up the doors to let him out. So it's
he
Kirk.
has to trigger the explosive bolts to open it up.
That's right. So Kirk has to swim underwater to blow the hatch to save the whales. The whales sing, the probe leaves. Now, an interesting thing about the whales singing in the probe, I never noticed before that when the whales go head down to the bottom of the ocean when they sing. There's this behavior, and the probe imitates that.
Yeah. And the probe has a little extension of a ball in a ray of light that mirrors the fin of the whale as it's head down.
I thought it was mirroring the eye, so we kind of get a close-up of the whale's eye and then a close-up of the ball, too. It could be either, but it's very interesting.
It's a nice visual touch.
Either way, it provides some sort of perspective on the probe that which way is up and down.
Yeah, that actually gives us that clue of the orientation of the probe.
Also, I got the sense that something, even though it's a brief conversation, that something very sad is being communicated, and then the drone retracts the ball and leaves.
Yes, it's satisfied with whatever the George and Gracie tell it. The clouds part, power comes back, and the crew goes swimming, including throwing Spock into the water when he didn't want to. Apparently he can swim. So now we cut to after this event, Kirk and the crew are marched into the Federation Council and presented to face the music, face the charges, and all charges are dismissed against them, but one. Kirk is reduced in rank to captain and given the duty that fits him so well, which is to be in command of a starship, and they're given command of the new Enterprise A.
In other words, he's given exactly what he wants.
Exactly, yes. Well, he did save the planet, and the headquarters of the Federation and Starfleet, so, a little of that.
Also, Sarek, in talking to Spock, admits that his opposition to Spock's enrollment in Starfleet may have been incorrect, which is huge.
That is a huge,
as an admission.
Yes. And Jillian also gives Kirk the brush off here. Kirk's like, hey, when can I find you? Can I give you a call sometime? And she says,
yeah,
don't worry, I'll find you. That's the last we see of Jillian. But she does give him a kiss on the cheek. That's a nice little brush off there. Yeah, I did like this. Spock does ask Sarek to give a message to his mother, tell her I feel fine, which is a nice double meaning there. And then we have the crew in space dock in their shuttle. I think it's Scotty who says they'll give us a freighter. That's
no, it was. I thought Scotty was the one who expressed that he feared it was going to be the Excelsior.
Well, Sulu says I'm hoping for Excelsior because he's going to be the captain of Excelsior soon. And Scotty says, why would you want that bucket of bolts? And then.
And in reality, it would be when their orders were cut, it would have the name of the ship they're going to be serving on in the orders.
Exactly.
But this is a movie, and we're getting a dramatic reveal.
Right. Now, I do want to back up a second. Speaking of Scotty and the Excelsior, when they're reading off the charges in the Federation Council chambers, and the camera's panning across the crew, and as they get to sabotaging a Federation starship, and James Doohan does the whole looking down, like a little uncomfortable as it's panning past them. That was a good moment. That was good. And then we come over the top of Excelsior in the shuttle in the space dock, and we see Enterprise A for the first time. And I remember watching that on screen, and the theater cheered to see the Enterprise.
Nice. Yeah,
because that was a good moment. Because the Enterprise is part of the crew, part of the cast. Mm-hmm. It's part of the show.
It's like the TARDIS.
Exactly. Yep. You got to have it. So, and then they immediately take her out instead of doing a shakedown and getting to know the crew. But
which we start out with the next movie that may or may not happen, or may have just been a fever dream on Kirk's part. But that's another story.
Yes, or according to the autobiography of James Kirk book, it was a movie made on some alien planet about them. A very bad movie. So and then that's where we end. They go off to do adventures. So I'll ask you, what do you think? But I know you guys both have said that this is one of your favorites.
Definitely. Again, this is one that I enjoy personally. I will say, however, we've discussed before, issues of politics and things like that. This is how you can get across a political message without being preachy.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we've had complaints about other episodes of shows, whether Doctor Who or Star Trek, that get preachy. This doesn't.
Yeah. A little. I mean, we'd get a little bit of that. Like at the end, Kirk says when man was killing these creatures, he was killing his own future. Yeah. But that's as far as it goes. That's not bad. Although today, he referred to humans collectively as man. What a sexist.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the other thing is, when we talked about Enterprise episode at Pajem, we talked about how the Andorians never showed up. Well, there was an Andorian officer in Starfleet.
Right. That's right. There was one at the Federation Council.
There was one there. Again, no speaking line or anything, but you saw him. And then finally, they had the comm table in Starfleet Command. Looked really familiar. They repurposed it as the engineering table in TNG.
Oh.
They just pulled the top off and put the engineering top on it.
Gotcha. That's true. Very good. Jimmy, any last notes?
I liked how I really enjoyed this movie. I liked the nice, complex plotting. And I like how it's so different than the standard Wrath of Khan formula. As much as I like Wrath of Khan, I don't want to see that every movie. This goes in a completely other direction. It is so much fun.
Yep.
It deserved to be the best-selling movie of the time for Star Trek. I also like how Leonard Nimoy performs in this and the way his character is written, because he is not classic Spock in this. He is like he's recovering from his memory reinstall, and he's not at the top of his game, and so he's having to cope with that. And comes across, you're kind of dealing with a more childlike Spock, who comes across as more humble and trusting and flexible and trying to figure this out. And I like, when he defers to his mom about the importance of feelings, even though he doesn't understand it at the beginning of the film, but because she thinks they're valuable, he'll be open to this. And then at the end of the movie, when McCoy's telling him he's going to have to guess, and Kirk doesn't balk at that, and McCoy explains what he's saying is he trusts your guesses more than most people. And Spock says, you are saying it is a compliment. Then I will try to make the best guess I can. And it's like he recognizes the compliment, he's flattered by it, and he's determined to try to do even better.
Right.
And it's like there's just something nice and charming about that. And so I like this kind of childlike, charming Spock that's logical but flexible and going along with stuff.
You mentioned how often they try to recreate the success of Wrath of Khan by making Wrath of Khan over and over. One of the things that happens is that Star Trek eventually they try to replicate the success of Voyage Home by having this, we're traveling back in time to a previous century sort of shtick again. They do it in Deep Space Nine, they do it in Voyager, they do it in TNG, and none of them work quite as well. And quite as well would be a judgment call, but the only time it really comes across nicely is the Deep Space Nine Trials and Tribulations, where they go into the past and play it for comedy like they did here. Right. It's our future, their past. But yes, that's probably the best traveling to the past one that they have. But most of the other ones, especially where they travel to somewhat close in time to us, whether it's 20th century or 21st century, it just doesn't work as well as this does. This really works great. All right. So I think that about wraps it up. We've talked almost as long as the movie, but we do want to. It's only 75% as long as the movie. Right. So we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek, including Theo V, Paul B, William N, Lisa P, and George O. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What do you think of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home? Do you hate it? We'd love to hear from someone who didn't like it. We'd love to know why. So let us know what you think about it and what we had to say about it by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Next Generation episode, Last Outpost. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Oh, not the Last Outpost. Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, Captain, there be whales here.